also the economic interest that's talked about, and that's going back to the language and the definition of community of interest that is in the law. We also have a category of reason to be together. That would be justification, the reasons that the individual is saying that the community of interest should be together. We also have a field for Section 2 issue or concern. That's referring to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We also have 3 fields dealing with Section 5. Those are also referring to Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. The first that's just here, Section 5 by itself, is just a checkbox, yes or no. Section 5 county, which is number 18, refers to which one of the Section 5 counties is at issue. And then number 19 is Section 5 issue or concern would be the substance of the issue or concern that's raised. For item number 20, we have non-COI, again, community of interest. So non-COI or neighborhood lines comments. So that would be a comment about where the lines should be drawn that don't necessarily have to do with a community of interest or a neighborhood. We also have a field for non-district comments. So if someone comes up and says, you guys are doing a great job, that would fall in there. We also have a field for if someone submits materials. In many cases, we're able to match up materials with the individual who submits them. And we also have a field for a description of the materials that are submitted during the testimony. The next page here.
Excuse me,
yes.
Ms. Henderson. Commissioner Yao.
Under field number, let's see, 13, 14, and 15, does that apply to the neighborhood as well?
No, there's not a definition of neighborhood in the law, so that's just trying to get to the definition of community of interest in the Constitution.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, another question.
For the field for, I guess this would be field 8, when the testimony is that when we've asked them to say what other counties you should be grouped with or whatever, is that where that would be, or where would that information be captured? You have the reason to be together.
Yes, so the way it looks a little bit funny the way this is laid out, but geographic location and summary of geographic comment kind of includes counties, cities, and streets. So if someone's saying, I want to talk about my community of interest that is located in X county, Y city, on ABC streets. So all of that is getting into it. And also we do collect information about if there's a recommendation. I think that my county should be concluded with this other county, that also would go in there. If it's referring to a county, it's captured there. If it's referring to a city, it's captured under cities and streets, et cetera.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One further clarification. The opposite of wanting it to be together, if the comment is saying, I don't want to be together because it's a different community of interest, how does that data get captured?
It also gets captured in this area. That it would be items 12, 13, and 14. It can be that we also categorize it under social interest, so that could be a divergent social interest or a divergent economic interest, because defining what is different about outside your community is just as important as what's inside of it.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay. On the next page, it says CRC Public Input Hearing Report. This is just a sample of some of the reports that we can run based on the using the database that we have the information input into. In this one, we just ran for speaker number, city of residence, and if there was COI testimony or not. And so you'll see the speaker numbers on the left, the city of residence in the middle. Where there's blanks, that's because the person did not indicate their city of residence. So there are fields we're not able to capture all fields for all individuals because sometimes people don't say where they live, or they just say their county or just say their city. And then the checkbox that's already on the right is what tells you if they presented COI, community of interest, testimony or not. So we can run these reports on any of the fields that the commission would want to see them.
Ms. Henderson?
Yes.
The speaker number, does that correspond to the actual number they were given, or is the order that they were speaking in?
We're trying to get it to correspond with the speaker number. Is that right, Bonnie? Yes, speaker number.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Julio.
So in essence, these are the fields that you've just given us an option of 1, 2, 3 different fields within this report, but in essence, you could run them all the way through if we asked.
Yes.
Or any combination thereof.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question as well. For instance, today we had 2 other speakers that didn't pick up a number. Are you automatically assigning them as a number beyond the last speaker that picked up a number? So, for instance, the last person who picked up a number today was 29, and we had 2 other speakers. Did you assign 30 and 31 to those individuals today? Okay, thank you.
Yes, and in some of the other hearings, we've had people that gave multiple testimony, and in some cases, they also provided their names, so we were able to match them up. But if you remember back, I think it was in Bakersfield, which seems like so long ago, but it was just 2 days ago. In Bakersfield, we asked people to restate their number when they came back up, because that way we don't capture them as a separate individual. We have a continuation of their testimony, their information.
Yes.
Do you have more information to provide on this?
No.
Well, what is the purpose of this?
This is just to give you an idea of what we can produce for you. It's just a sample so that you know, to show you kind of that if you wanted to give a report and say, I want to see everyone who testified at the hearing in Marysville that was from Yuba City, for example, then we could actually pull that up for you.
So you would just run a chart. Well, you can run a field or run a report on any of these fields. So you just gave us an example, but you could narrow this down to say, we want to see everybody who talked about weed patch.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that would be the purpose of segregating the fields as you've just identified in order to prepare reports such as this when we want to narrow specific information when an issue comes up.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. On the next page, this is just a random file that we pulled up by the speaker number. And it shows you the various fields that there were testimony from. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. This is showing you two speakers. We were looking at COI testimony. So it's just 2 samples from one of the hearings where people provided COI or community of interest testimony.
Any questions?
Is there a way, I suspect there is based on your fields, that you could identify, not necessarily the speaker, but the capture of the information regarding similar communities of interest or similar recommendations on counties out of the number of individuals that have testified? For instance, today's a good example because it's just easily right off the top of our head. You heard that there were residents of this area that had made a recommendation of keeping, if we were going to increase the population with Merced, that we would go up into Stanislaus. How do you run a report to identify the number of individuals that testified to that today? Where would that be, or how would you run a report that we could compare when we're looking at Merced, let's say, and we're drawing the lines as an example, and we're looking at needing to add population, and we have a recollection of some testimony? How do you draw this report for us to identify the number of speakers that made certain recommendations on increasing the population in the county?
Could I please get back to you in the answer on that?
Sure.
I'm not an expert on this particular database, so I don't want to give you the incorrect answer on that. So if I could get back to you on that,
Great.
please.
Fine. I understand this is the first process, so that we're putting this all together, so I appreciate that.
Yes, Mr. Giulio, then Mr. Anchetta.
Okay, I just have 2 quick questions. The way this last one is broken out, I see you have the speaker, then you have counties, cities, streets. Was this how, this wasn't how the presenter didn't necessarily say, I have county interests, city interests, streets, was it? Or was it more that you heard the whole testimony and you broke down that testimony for us?
In most cases, we break it down. In some cases, the individual does have very detailed a testimony, but as I'm sure you remember, sometimes you talk about, I live in this county, I live in the city, and we get it. We take the testimony as a whole and we break it down.
So you fill those fields. Okay. And just second, for clarification, what we're discussing here is the wrap-up for only the public input hearings, not any of the emails or other submitted documents we've received. This is simply for the public testimony.
That's correct. We'll be including the written testimony that's been submitted directly to the commission soon.
Commissioner Anchetta and then Commissioner.
Yeah, that was a related question. I mean, one, I'm assuming that the prefix code you're going to be using we'll get an index so you can know which prefix code corresponds to which hearing. Mm-hmm. We just have sort of a series of 5 numbers here. And then if we wanted to cross-tab basically every comment, both public input and written, mailed, et cetera, from a particular region, that could all be put together
Yes.
as well.
That's actually why we have the field for type of testimony, which is it's the third field that we're collecting, because we have public input, hearing testimony, and written testimony.
Any other questions? Yes.
This question is really for the chair. If we're just reviewing the public testimony, are we giving more weight to the public testimony as compared to the inputs that we receive from email or from other sources? In other words, are we going to have another opportunity to review the region with all the other data before us simultaneously?
I would presume that that right now we're establishing a framework, given the evidence that we've been kind of privy to in direct testimony from the public. The others we really haven't seen. Some of us may have seen them all, some of us perhaps not. So I see this that we're not going to give more weight to the public testimony versus the other kind of input, that there will be an opportunity later on certainly to engage with that information as well. So, yes, Mr. Julio.
I think that's a very important point, because we've encouraged people, even though this is the first wrap-up for the input that we've received for these regions for now, we will not be drawing those first maps until the end of May and June, so we want to make sure people know that if you submit material online in the mail, that will be given equal weight and be considered. I think, as my understanding, this is simply, while it's fresh in our mind, having gone through these three regions, is to have an opportunity to reflect on what we've heard in person. So what we're looking at is the in-person, but again, to encourage people that they still have a few weeks to be able to provide more information to us.
Yeah, it's a discussion of chunks of information. Yeah. Okay.
May I follow up?
Yes.
In this comment? Do we have in our schedule a regional input discussion with the total data that we receive on those regions? Is that something that's on our plan in terms of discussing? I know we're going to give directions to the mappers on what we want to do in terms of direction given to them on that, but do we have on our agenda a date where we discuss the total input by region?
Yeah, I think our agenda says that there are discussions with line drawer, and at that time, certainly preliminary discussion on all of the information that we've gathered would be necessary for us to even start. So I would say that even though we may not have that specific language, I think the language itself would allow us to have that discussion. Is that correct?
There's several meetings that say Commission directs line drawer,
Yes.
so that might be the meetings you have in mind.
Again, the issue is not direction to the line drawer. The purpose of the question is, if we are going to come back and talk about, just pick for example, Region 9, okay? The public may want to participate in that region because they reside in that region or they have special interest in that region. So if we have but if this wrap-up is specifically talking about Region 9, okay, or the regions that we have visited today, do we need to set up a discussion on the total amount of data that we receive outside of the broad category of directions to the line drawers? I think really that's the question.
Yes, Commissioner Raya.
I think part of that question and what the information that Commissioner Yao is looking for, and maybe you can tell us when we might have that additional report with will incorporate the written documents we've received in the hearings as well as what we've received by other means.
And I think we're just looking at, I know this is a ways out, but I think Commissioner Yao raises a very good point in terms of I'm assuming most commissioners would like to have a summary of all the written and public testimony and enough time so that we could review it and digest it prior to the point when we get into the directing the line drawers. And look, based on our schedule at the end of May, I believe the Northridge meetings, the statewide input, and then a very short turnaround. That's what, right before Memorial Day, and then there's really only a few days that we have on our calendar in terms of directing. This could be for us as a commission to discuss. And excuse us, we are talking a little business here, but I do think for our line dryers, they'll need to have some notice by us so that we can. I think I'd like to have that information, enough time to read it and digest it before we meet again.
Oh, okay.
No. I didn't hear the answer. No, did you have a question as to the time frame that they would have to, and I'm sorry I missed the answer if one of you answered Commissioner Raya's question. Okay.
There was more discussion, so I didn't want to
interrupt
the commission.
Okay. Wait for the answer.
Okay, the response by Bonnie is that that Q2 will do their best to get this those summaries for each region as soon as possible. That includes written testimony as well as. Yes, of course. Yes. Question.
It's not a question. It's just trying to nail this down before we move on. I think what people are saying is that we want a complete summary and presentation to us of everything, input, testimony, written for all the regions before we sit down and do our direction. And we have set aside days, but that either that first day where we have the time blocked out for meet with experts or something else, we do need to have time to review the totality of the material and absorb it and really be able then to start working on the first draft with that we don't just get there to the first meeting with our mappers and not have had a time to discuss how we see the total information. That at least that's my concern.
Yeah, if I could interject, please, Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes.
Would it, as providing the written testimony received so far by the first meeting in Los Angeles, be acceptable? I mean, in a week and a half.
We were talking about, I thought Commissioner Yao had brought up at the end of the process, and that we had already had a previous answer to what's going to happen with the written testimony, that it's just going to take a little longer, and then you're going to summarize that. Yes. But then I thought there was a subsequent question about the total wrap-up, and I'm hoping we do have that.
Yes, I think that that Q2 could use some direction in terms of So
yeah.
Yes.
May I clarify my request?
Yeah.
I had some false expectation for today's wrap-up. I had an expectation that we would wrap up all the information we receive on those regions that we have visited and be able to see that totality of information. And I understand that the information will continue to come in, but at least I thought that since we have specifically completed our initial public hearing for example, Region 9, we would now receive the summary of all the input that we receive on Region 9, okay?
And all input would include...
Right, right, would include all the others. Since that's not the case, I'm suggesting that I think we need an opportunity to at least receive that totality of information. And it's not Q2's fault or anybody's fault. Maybe it's just my false expectation for today's effort, and I just want to be able to share that with the rest of the commission.
Let me just mention also, for not only for the benefit of the commission, but for the benefit of the public, in where Q2 kind of positions itself on this one, and that is that we were late in developing and solidifying the contract with Q2, so we've actually just picked them up the day before, right? The day before we started on this on hitting the road. So as Chairman Yao accurately points out, it's not Q2's fault, right? It's part of the planning process, and this planning process really involves the first time a citizen commission has been implemented here in California and actually, the United States. So we're learning as we go, and this will be very important for subsequent commissions in terms of setting a template that will be easier for those commissions to follow. So anyway, so who is Commissioner Raya, then Filkins Weber?
Okay, I guess my request would be, because we have a week off, so to speak, and then we're going to go into a series of 17 or 18 days pretty steadily. And all of us have something else that we're going to be doing on our days off from commission work. Can we find some time sooner than the next business meeting that we could get this? I mean, I think we all appreciate that we're still trying to get our process. This is all new to all of us, of course, but now I think we're getting a little concerned, not so much about getting, that the information is there, but just that we're not going to have the time because we're all going home tonight to go back to our other jobs for a few days, and before we, pack our clothes again and head out. Well, actually, some of us are lucky. We'll be in Los Angeles, so we'll be sleeping in our own beds. But I think we need to have some sense of getting it before the next business meeting.
Yes, certainly. We definitely can do that. I only suggested it because I wasn't sure if it had to be presented in an open meeting. So
I think it would have to be posted, but you could certainly staff could distribute it to the commission.
Yes, Ms. Filkins Weber.
Which that's what, and I don't want to see us to get into a process in which we are duplicating these wrap-ups. So what I would suggest for today is if we could have a better idea from Q2 to get us the wrap-up with the public comments regarding, our input hearings up to date. And then I would ask that outreach/technical in their subcommittee actually take a look at our calendar and have communications with Representative Q2 at our next business meeting, or maybe in your committee meeting, to decide how, and because we need Q2's input to determine how they could actually put the public written comments together and get it to us, and whether it can be done simultaneously with the information that you're receiving from the public input hearings, the public testimony versus what the public comments are. I just see us ruminating over this over and over again today, and I think it's a better topic for outreach and technical now that we have Q2 on board. But I certainly agree that if we want to see a report on this, adding the public comment, I wouldn't have an objection to maybe getting that out and having it posted, Commissioner Dye, by next week sometime, and certainly leave that to Q2's discretion. But after that, I'd ask that this issue be discussed in outreach and then brought to the full commission in Long Beach.
Yes, Ms. DeJulia.
And just to follow up with that being a part of technical and outreach, so it looks like maybe what we're thinking of considering is we would have something like a wrap-up at the end of a region where we would be able to provide ideally the results of the testimony and the results, if possible, of the written submitted material as well to that date. And that way we can, while it's fresh in our mind, review everything we've received. And then would it be acceptable to have a break in, so that I'm just thinking about out loud with Q2, that they're not continuously, there may be some element to provide some continuous updates, but at the very least, we'd also, what Commissioner Yao was saying, at the very end, we'd also be able to need to have another updated wrap-up that would incorporate what we had originally had with the testimony and the written, plus anything that's happened additionally since then. Am I hearing that would be a good discussion point? Okay.
That seems inclusive of everything we would need, all the information that we would have.
Everything up until that one point. Yeah. Maybe Commissioner Weber's giving me that look.
Only because you're talking about a number of days. I think outreach and technical really need to get in the minutia of this calendar and how you're really realistically, based on what calendar we have right now, going to be able to do this for the full commission, whether that's squeezing us in a business meeting or how you're going to look at it. And I think that that's so detailed, but I think you're correct. It's just we need to look at the calendar and see how, because I just don't think it's practical, nor do I find it efficient for us to be doing multiple wrap-ups for the same region. It's not practical for us to be able to do that on the calendar and the schedule we have right now.
And could I ask legal to maybe in their advisory committee give us some input? Yeah, I'm going to jump back. I'm going to throw it back to give us some. Yeah, to give us some input in terms of what individual commissioners can receive and what needs to be received outside of commission business and what can be received, what needs to be received in a formal meeting versus just posted online. I heard some discussion about what we could receive outside of the meeting.
You can receive.
You can receive anything as long as it's public.
That's right.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
And in our next business meeting, which includes advisory committee meetings, then is scheduled for April 27th. Okay, did we thoroughly confuse you, Ms. Henderson?
Thank you for indulging us, Ms. Henderson.
So,
Sure.
all right, so would somebody like to kind of summarize where we are? My understanding, and I stand to be corrected. So as often happens. So my understanding then is that we're going to move forward, giving Q2 the opportunity to gather all of the information that's up to date.
Why don't you slow down just a little bit, give Q2 a chance to listen.
that we will task Q2 to gather all of the information, public and written, submitted online and by fax and mail, and that you will send that information up to the date sometime next week when we're off, and you will that will be posted online and that will be sent to us individually, which fulfills the transparency aspect of Bagley-Keene, and that we will discuss this process further in terms of further wrap-ups and what format those wrap-ups would take to include and what information would be included at that time. We will discuss that in the Technical Outreach Committee meeting of April the 27th. And then at that time also we will look at the calendar to accommodate when further wrap-ups would be could be scheduled given that format that we hope to establish on the 27th. Does that cover it? Yes. Question.
Ms. Sargis, are you giving, when a speaker comes up and hands you either the remaining comments that they were unable to finish or a map, that you got a number of materials today, are you giving those directly to Bonnie or Ms. Henderson? Where is
Yes,
that?
after the meeting, I'm gathering them all together and the speaker numbers put on it, and then I'm giving them to Q2.
Thank you.
And we make a copy, and the original goes back with the commission. And
All
we're
right.
also using stickers to create document numbers, like exhibit numbers.
Okay, so I think the question now is, we have a plan for that aspect of it. I think the question for now is, how do we move forward with this session and the proposed review, the executive summary that was going to be presented then? If it includes, is there value to discussing that summary of just the public testimony that has been provided up until now, or do we just hold that discussion until we receive the full complement of information?
I would suggest that we continue with the data that's before us, because I think we can learn an awful lot
Of
from
course,
stepping
of
through
course.
all the processes that are new to us.
And that goes back to my statement that we're actually developing a framework for the future. So please proceed, Ms. Henderson.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Sargis is handing out copies of the executive summary. It's a draft executive summary at this point. We will be adding the written testimony.
Point of clarification, does the information we're receiving now include the testimony that we've just heard today, or is it close off as of yesterday?
It closed off as of yesterday. I can summarize some issues that we heard today that follow along very similar themes from the other hearings, but it's not in this document yet. Okay, we also have it on the screen here for public viewing. Okay, so the first part of the document is really a summary of the testimony that we've heard so far in each of the hearings that we've seen. And I'm just going to go through kind of the major points. What we tried to do was summarize the testimony and also some of the major issues that have been coming up. So starting with the Reading hearing last week on April 9th, we heard several proposals about drawing the Northern California districts from west to east, the coast to Nevada border. What you see underneath here in the COI underlying this community of interest, again, you're going to see COI a lot just because community of interest is a lot of letters to type. So COI, the underlying COI behind these thoughts. First, we have shared economic interests, rural agricultural needs, recreation and tourism, that there's different and more populated areas to the south end of the districts were more urban. That's referring to the way that the districts are currently drawn in a north to south manner. And they have different needs which currently dominate the politics. Shared social interests are similar rural culture, use each other's recreation opportunities, not much in common with urban populated areas near Sacramento and the southern end of the current districts. We also heard testimony about keeping the current north to south orientation of the districts, with COI underlying testimony about shared economic interests of transportation along the north-south highways like the 101, 5, and 99, water issues, different crops between the coast, valley, and mountain areas, shared social interests having to do with the transportation corridors and similar crops, different cultures between the coast, valley, and mountain areas, including that the coast is more liberal than inland. We also had testimony about there being diverse social and economic interests. Some testimony that it was better to put diverse interests into districts for less divisive politics in Sacramento and more representatives with a stake in both rural north and southern urban parts of northern districts. We heard a testimony about keeping specific counties together, Del Norte, Humboldt, and Mendocino together and separate from inland counties. The COI underlying there was shared economic interests of fishing, recreation and tourism, lumber, wine, grapes, transportation dependence on Highway 101, and shared social interests with the coastal environmental issues, living in more isolated areas such as Del Norte, and traveling over mountains into the inland is difficult. There's a proposal about Yolo County, keeping Yolo County whole because of shared water interests, land between two rivers. Unique water community is a COI, community of interest again, and it's currently split up into 2 or 3 assembly districts, Senate districts, and congressional districts. So they have to fight a lot for help on water issues. Regarding testimony about neighborhoods, we did not receive any direct testimony about neighborhoods. Moving on to our next hearing in Marysville on April 10th.
Before you move on,
Sure.
Chair.
Yes, question.
Oh,
No,
please.
it's just a comment. The last bullet under keep north to south orientation, that it was the thought of putting diverse interests into the district for less divisive politics, and that you would have, because you'd have representatives that had a stake in both rural north and southern urban. That came up also in the east-west testimony about the transportation barriers, that in fact the transportation barriers that exist trying to go west to east in that area of California, that maybe there'd be better roads if they did have a representative for the a band that went east to west. So I'd like to see that captured.
Chair? I have an additional comment also.
Yes,
in that same, for the first proposal, also there was the comment they share a common watershed. and there was a comment about having a representative who was totally dedicated to their interests.
Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Julia.
I'm just sorry. I'd like to follow up on Commissioner Dyes. I mean, that was kind of the summary that was at the end, was the balance between what we mentioned earlier was one representative, the east-west drawn line. The question is one representative that would have everyone's interest, as opposed to three that have partial interest because of the population. So I think that's an aspect, a summary that was made during that meeting that was important to capture.
Okay. Yes, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for those clarifications. Okay, so the Marysville hearing was held on April 10th, 2011. Some geographic proposals that were raised during that hearing. We heard a lot about keeping Yuba County and Sutter County together. We also heard about keeping Yuba and Sutter counties together, keeping Calusa, Glen, Butte, Yuba, and Sutter together. More generally, it's heard again about the south-north districts in the valley being part of the North State, as opposed to west-east districts proposed at the Reading hearing. Testimony about the valley area being different from the coast and also from the mountains and even the foothills in Nevada County. There was testimony about highways binding the counties, highways 5, 90, and 70, and their corridors. The COI underlying these groupings, there are shared social interests such as educational system, chamber of commerce, counties, agencies and services, nonprofit agencies, clubs and social organizations, healthcare services, shared flood hazards in the river between the Sutter and Yuba County, the Marysville metro area or the greater Yuba City area, including each other, having shared transportation and watershed. There was testimony about Latino, Hmong, and Sikh populations that are an important part of both of the two cities and counties. Again, that's referring to Yuba and Sutter counties. And shared economic interests such as shared agricultural issues, water needs, growing peaches, almonds, and rice, unlike the coast, which grows wine grapes, so the type of crops that are actually grown in the areas, and the sharing of highways. There was some testimony also about the differences between Sutter County and Yuba County. That there was some testimony about Sutter being a flat rural farming community, while Yuba, outside of the narrow area that's near Sutter County, having foothills and also having more urban areas. There is also a proposal about Yolo County, putting Davis with Sacramento, that has more in common with the urban areas than with the agricultural areas of Yolo, and also about keeping Yolo County together. It shares air and transportation corridor with Solano County. Again, in Marysville, we did not receive specific testimony about neighborhoods.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
To expand on the narrative around Yolo County, I had in my notes and remembered that the suggestion around Davis was actually a Davis-Dixon West Sacramento cluster, that all of those were part of this common kind of technological, agriculture technology type area, and so should be kept together, and that there was additional feedback that those areas share the same water board, if I remember correctly.
Yes, Mr. Julio.
I'm not sure if this will be addressed later on or even how my fellow commissioners feel about this, but the way this is presented to us, I'm curious, not that there's a weight that's given to one person's versus 20 people that speak on an issue, but I do think you've captured different thoughts, but I do think we heard these options presented by certain numbers of people. There may have been 10 people that would fall into the category of keep Sutter, Yuba County. There would be 5 people. You know, there are numbers associated with that, and I think, not to weigh things, but I think it gives us a better representation of the number of individuals who spoke on these issues, and that's a big distinction. Because you have here, there could have been one person, as I recall, there may have been one person in Marysville that spoke on YOLO, but and it's an important point, but we need to capture the number of people who are speaking on these different issues.
Chair?
Yes. Commissioner Dye.
Yeah, I think that's important to capture. I agree it shouldn't necessarily be the weighting, but it's information that we want to know about, because sometimes there are organized groups that will bring in a bunch of speakers, and it doesn't necessarily mean it should be given more weight than an individual who has a different proposal. I just wanted to clarify that that the differences between Sutter County and Yuba County, that was actually a separate proposal. Shouldn't that be a separate bullet? You're not including that in the proposal to keep it together, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's a formatting glitch.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Sorry,
that
the bullet is
they
missing on
grouped
that
together
piece.
because they had exactly opposite directions. So,
Thank you. We need a bullet.
Any other questions? Yes.
Notes from Marysville, and I have a note here that somebody from the city council testified about keeping Yuba and Nevada County together, or putting them together. Is that in here? Okay. Okay, all right. And that person also talked about that Yuba and Nevada City shared a large Asian history. Okay.
sure, I have a process question because,
Yes.
Again, some of us might want to take some time and go back and look at our notes and compare to this. So maybe this is a question to Q2. How the commission can provide this kind of clarification and feedback, and what goes into the final summary.
Go ahead, please. I was just going to suggest that if there's any way to get that in one document as opposed to 14, that would be very helpful.
I agree as well that I'm trying to look at my notes. I know that there was, you do have like one sentence about Sikh population, but then I also know that there was a transportation corridor. Maybe that's what you mean by what you have at the top. And I don't know. I'm having trouble with this right now. I'm trying to look at my notes and trying to see if you have everything in here. So I don't know. What are your expectations from the commission based on this summary, I guess is my first question. What do you want us to provide to you in this summary? Is it to verify that you've captured it? Obviously we've pointed out a few things that are missing, but what are your expectations from us in this summary?
What we would ultimately like to get is direction about how to start thinking about drawing lines. I think it's very helpful to get input about things that you think need to be highlighted more, or that maybe we don't have in here, so that's also very helpful. Excuse me. Pardon me. But the ultimate goal that is to provide information for you to tell us about how to think about the state and how to prioritize different conflicting testimony.
Could you give us a couple of examples of what that might look like?
It's at the end.
Yeah.
Ms. Henderson, do you want some water?
Yeah.
Do you?
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I would encourage us to move to that second part, because there's 9 pages of notes here of the various meetings. We will be here for a long time just checking the minutes is what it amounts to. I think we should take these and review these, and if we have additions or comments, that we submit them to the staff and let them collate them and bring them together, and then we can get that and move on to the part that that they're looking for decisions on.
Yeah. Do we have consensus on that from the commission?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. All right. So, moving to page 7 then. All right. So, actually, if I can just highlight a few, just a second. All right. So moving to page 7. So in Region 9, there's several decision points or things for the commission to consider. One of the main ones is whether the districts in Northern California should be ideally drawn north to south or east to west. along that is whether the districts in Northern California should stay on one side of the coastal mountain or range across it. That's the north, south, east to west. What we point out here is that we will be later receiving testimony about Region 8, which could be impacted by that decision. So if the commission wants to hold off on that ultimate decision, especially on the coastal area, since there might be some impact there. Okay, and again, looking at the north-south orientation, should the districts in Northern California ideally be drawn to avoid putting counties closer to the Oregon border and to the same district with counties closer to Sacramento, or to follow the major freeways like the 5 and the 99? Whether Sutter and County and Yuba County should ideally put in the same district or different districts, and whether Butte County should ideally be placed in the same district as Sutter and Yuba counties or in a different district. For Region 5, we heard a lot of testimony about San Luis Obispo County and keeping it whole, about Santa Barbara County, and about Ventura County. So the questions that can be addressed here are whether San Luis Obispo County should ideally be kept whole or split to separate in the northern southern communities. We heard that the dividing line was the Cuesta grade. Another way to split it would be coastal eastern communities. And do you want to show the map? I'm sorry.
Chair?
We have put together a few maps trying to illustrate, especially the Cuesta grade and the Conejo grade testimony that came up in the San Luis Obispo hearing, if you'd like to see them.
Yes.
Yeah, we would like to see them, although I wanted to make a general comment because I just feel like it's very early in the process for us to be making decisions like this, especially when first of all, we haven't even considered the written testimony, which is, presumably a much higher number than people who are able to travel to a public hearing. And also we haven't seen testimony from adjacent regions. So I don't know that we can provide that level of direction at this point in time. That's my personal feeling. But having said that, I would love to see what you did with the Cuesta and Conejo grades.
Okay, so here on this map is San Luis Obispo County. The green portion is, and there's a green portion and the blue portion, and that dividing line between the kind of aqua blue portion and the green portion of San Luis Obispo County is the Cuesta grade, which is a demarcation that we heard a lot about during the testimony.
Yeah, the thing that I find missing, I need to know the population in each of those two areas. The total number is not helpful.
We can show you that.
For the green area, which right now is labeled 0413CUEGRA, the population is 114,566. And for the blue portion down here, which indicates southern San Luis Obispo County, then, one moment, sorry about that. The population is 155,071.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of questions and more just my thought process around this. I'm similar, I think, to other commissioners really struggling with this, putting this conversation in context. And I feel like it's useful just as a preview to go through the questions so we have a sense of what to anticipate. But without having our next chair here, my hope would be that we can set aside some time at our next business meeting, and I'm not sure what the structure of that meeting is, if we have committee time set up before that, but where we can really discuss the process that we're going to use to actually begin giving direction to the line drawers. I know we had thrown around different concepts that we might start with Section 5 counties and build outward from there, or just kind of what are the steps along the way. I feel like we're jumping in just because we've physically been in these regions, and yet our process may not want to follow exactly that same order of business. And so I really appreciate all the work that's gone into what you've done thus far. And it's more just a signal, I think, to us as a commission that this is a good time to pause and build in that time to define our process clearly before we jump in head first.
We have on that date, on the date that I mentioned, April 27th. Right now, I think we've scheduled like half-an-hour meetings for each of the committees.
Commissioner Gay, what is we have the business meeting the first day. It starts at 1.
Yes.
What's the business meeting starting for the second day?
So there's a training for right now.
Yeah,
right?
it's a VRA training. It's 4 hours, 4-hour training.
There's no way to do earlier than to discuss.
Well, is there a reason we can't meet earlier, since all of us will be down there on the second day?
If we've noticed a meeting starting at 1, we can't meet earlier. But we could certainly go later.
I was going to say, it goes until close of business, correct?
Right. Okay.
We could have dinner brought in.
All right. So any other comments regarding the points that were brought up by Connie?
I have a question for Ms. Henderson. As you can see, we're all, I don't think it's just avoidance. I think we really aren't ready without having seen some of the other regions and taken testimony to start making a decision like east, west, north, south. But explain to me your Q2's thought processes about why you thought we would be ready. I'm serious. I don't want us to just ignore something that you guys recommended we do.
Yeah, well, ultimately, drawing 4 maps for the whole state of California is a big job. And so we have the hearings clustered in these regions in a way that we can start making preliminary decisions. And one thing I want to point out is that if you were to decide something today, that doesn't mean you can't change your mind later. Basically, it's giving us input to be able to start looking at where lines might go, to be able to identify and flag issues for you that are going to come up when we get more into the line drawing process. So if, for example, you told us today, yes, we want to divide San Luis Obispo County X way. I'm not going to suggest one or the other. And then we started drawing it that way, and we realized that that has a ripple effect, the way that redistricting always does. When you do something in one area of the state, it can affect somewhere very far away. We would be able to come back to you and say, commissioners, when you suggested this split, this is the effects that it has, and this is why, and to be able to comply with other criteria, maybe like equal population issue or a Voting Rights Act issue, it may not be possible to do that split that way. So to be able to take an initial pass at looking just at the basic architecture about where districts will go, and the districts and the regions that we've visited so far, it's very helpful for us to be able to start doing that, even with just preliminary guidance from you, and understanding, of course, that you guys always have the prerogative to change your minds as we move forward.
Yes. Peter.
I think we need to follow the priority that we've been expressing so far. Not only is the equal population important, but for example, I need to know what the minority populations are. We need to look at that before we even decide as to what the map is going to look like. I think I advocated before that where we start the map is very important. It's going to drive the shape of the rest of the districts. And if we start with the Section 5 cities, that's to give them the maximum number or degree of freedom so